Hello everyone, and welcome to another video, and this is something I've been wanting to do for quite some time and share some of my memories of one of my favorite RPG series, Final Fantasy. Now, where should I begin? I guess I should start from the very beginning, and that was the first Final Fantasy game I ever played, and that was actually the very first Final Fantasy. And you know, it's really funny because at that time, I didn't really know what an RPG was. I had played Dragon Warrior. That was the first RPG I ever played. But I remember I went to a friend's house, and we were sitting there going through some Nintendo games after school, and I was looking at some of the games on a shelf, and he had Final Fantasy sitting there. Well, I had never seen that game before, so I was like, oh, can we try this out? And he was like, no, you don't want to play that. I'm like, why not? And he was like, it's just, I don't like it. It's a dumb game. And so I talked him into putting it in. You know, and the reason why he didn't like the game is because he didn't understand it. He had never played an RPG. Now, I was by far not an RPG enthusiast or anything like that. I was only like 7 years old at the time. But I knew what kind of game this was. Now, it wasn't a couple years until I finally got a Super Nintendo and found out they had not just one new Final Fantasy, but they actually had two at that time, which is Final Fantasy 2 and 3. Now, these games are so much darker than the first Final Fantasy I had played. The first Final Fantasy game was very linear when it came to story. It was, you know, starting to develop at that time. But, you know, this time you had some things that when I was playing at that time, I couldn't believe I was playing it in a video game. Like, you know, characters dying, or, you know, in Final Fantasy VI. I'm not going to try to give away too many spoilers in case you've never played these games. But Final Fantasy VI, you deal with things like attempted suicide, and Final Fantasy IV, you have you know, people making sacrifices and stuff like that. It was very, very, I don't want to say adult, but it was very different for a kid my age. I was like, I don't know, about 10 or 11 at the time. It was something that I had never experienced in a game. And also the graphics were just so much better. I mean, they had that Mode 7 feel with the scrolling graphics, and, you know, I remember riding the giant mechs, and the battle system, the music was just, it just took everything to another level. And yes, I just realized I'd called Final Fantasy 3 and Final Fantasy 2 4 and 6, and as you guys know, these are actually, in Japan, this is Final Fantasy 6 and this is Final Fantasy 4. Now, this is where Final Fantasy number-wise gets very confusing. But if you have a Super Nintendo, or I mean, you can get the games on GBA, you can find them anywhere, and you haven't played these gems yet, you definitely owe it to yourself. And now I have some great memories when Final Fantasy went to PlayStation. I honestly remember when Final Fantasy VII had just came out for PlayStation. For one, I was confused, because I was wondering where 5, 6 had went, and 4. That's where the numbers started getting confusing. But I was also kind of pissed off because a lot of my favorite games like Mega Man X and Final Fantasy were leaving Nintendo and going to PlayStation. You know, it's funny thinking about it now, but I almost felt like betrayed. I was just like, you know, these are Nintendo titles. What are they doing going to this, you know, PlayStation, a system I didn't know anything about at the time. But I finally tried out Final Fantasy VII, and this RPG definitely changed a lot of people's lives. Now, what's really funny is I started having a flashback with Final Fantasy VII. And the reason why I'm talking about this is because, again, I would hang out with my buddies during recess or, you know, having lunch, and we'd talk about games, and they'd be like, man, have you played Final Fantasy VII yet? And they'd be like, yeah, I played it. What'd you think? I didn't like it. Why not? I don't know, it was just dumb. You know, years later, I'm still hearing the same excuse from some people that just didn't understand an RPG, and, you know, nothing against it, because you know, if you don't know anything about RPGs, then it is kind of a weird kind of game to play. So I would explain it to them about leveling up and, you know, the random battles and upgrading, and of course the materia system, which was freaking awesome. And it would turn into one of their favorite games of all time. And it was such a magical moment. One of the almost like competitions that all of us would start having, once we all started playing Final Fantasy VII and we got the groove of it, there were 2 bosses in the game that were so freaking hard. I'm telling you guys that I am not a pissed off gamer. I don't rage quit or anything like that, but these boss battles got me very close to it. And it was, of course, the Ruby and Emerald bosses. You know, they were so much harder than, you know, even the last boss in the game. But if you finally beat them, you would get a golden chocobo, and you would get materia, the master materia of like all the magic, which would make, you know, the end of the game an absolute breeze. And it wasn't too long after all of us were just completely getting immersed in Final Fantasy VII that they started coming out with Final Fantasy VIII. And this is a game right here I feel like divides fans. You know, you have people that love Final Fantasy VIII, and you have people that hate it. And, you know, it's funny because 7 and 8 are so important to people, and I mean, you have some people that are like diehard 7 fans. They get mad at people that are like diehard Final Fantasy VIII fans. It's all funny. I think it's hilarious. But I played this game the first time on a demo disc, mind you. Pizza Hut were doing demo discs where you could order pizza and it would deliver your pizza, of course, and a demo disc that would have like Tony Hawk and, you know, all these different games, and one of the games on there was Final Fantasy VIII. And at this time, they also started talking about the release of the PlayStation 2, and I remember when we were playing Final Fantasy VIII and that opening scene of the ocean, and we would just sit there and be in shock and awe, and the opening cinematic just had so much of a, it just had this great movie feel and gave you goosebumps, and we're like, wow. I mean, the graphics already look this great, imagine what the PS2 is going to look like. And I have to say, I played Final Fantasy VIII, of course. I never beat it. I don't think it's a bad game, but it's definitely not one of my favorite Final Fantasies. Now, I know what you guys are thinking, what is my favorite Final Fantasy? And that's when we get to Final Fantasy IX. This is my favorite in the series. I made a whole video talking about my love of this game, but just a little backstory. It was funny because the same friends that I was hanging out with that played Final Fantasy VII and VIII, I remember they were really excited when they first heard about Final Fantasy IX until they saw the artwork. A lot of them were kind of, that's when the group got divided again. Some of us really liked it, some of us absolutely hated it. I loved it because to me it was a homage to the old Final Fantasy style. Now you had like the steam airships and the medieval flair, but it still had that modern, you know, current gen at that time look to it. It was amazing. A great soundtrack too. And also I'd like to add, what I really liked about Final Fantasy IX was the character Zidane, your hero. He wasn't a dark hero. You know, Cloud and Squall had like that, you know, I'm a badass, I'm very quiet, you know, kind of attitude to him, where Zidane was very flamboyant, very, you know, womanizing and cracking jokes, but he got serious when he had to, and I thought that was absolutely amazing. And while Final Fantasy IX was the swan song to Final Fantasy games on the PlayStation, we were eagerly waiting for the next Final Fantasy, and that was Final Fantasy X on the PS2. I really enjoyed Final Fantasy X. I thought it was well written, and it was kind of fast paced in some spots. I really liked the sphere system, and Blitzball was a lot of fun too. And one of the things that all my friends would all get together and we would talk about was the fact that this is the first Final Fantasy with voice acting. And, you know, by today's standards, it's nothing to really talk about. It's something that we all, you know, kind of take as it is, that video games have voice actors. But this was the first time we had seen this in a Final Fantasy, and it made some pretty good conversations, you know, because we always wanted to have, like, maybe voice acting in Final Fantasy VII, and that's when we would bring back, you know, is Final Fantasy VII going to be remade? It's a dream, a pipeline dream for all the fans for many years. I don't know if Square Enix will actually do it, but my fingers are still crossed. But anyway guys, this concludes my Final Fantasy Memories video, and I know I left a lot of games out, and I might go back to those titles for future videos, but this is where I want you guys to come in. I want you guys to tell me some of your favorite Final Fantasies, some of your memories that followed. I'd love to hear them. But anyway guys, thanks for watching and thank you for subscribing, and as always, happy gaming.